Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am Valeria and this is the Off-Road Ranch. In this video, I will talk about the progress I've made on my land in April and May, and I will show you the works I've done and the results. In August 2025, I leased 2,500 square meters of land where I plan to plant an orchard in the future. No one had tended this land for decades. Some of the grasses were as tall as 1.5 meters, and the roots were 40 centimeters deep. So I spent most of April and May preparing the new plot. Here is what I've done over the past 2 months. In September 2025, I plowed about 70% of the new leased plot. This spring, I carried out agricultural work once again to cultivate the land. I plowed the land again with a tractor, then dug it with a shovel, and then removed as many tree and shrub roots as possible, along with weeds. After that, I additionally harrowed the entire field with a tractor. However, I knew that a huge amount of weeds would grow as a result of the aeration. Since I am not an agronomist, I consider applying herbicides on my own to be risky and dangerous to my health. For example, many farmers are familiar with Monsanto, the company that developed glyphosate, which according to numerous studies can lead to blood cancer. I am not willing to contribute to the development of my own illnesses on my land due to responsibility and negligence. So I chose a longer path to improving the soil and getting rid of weeds. I removed as many roots as possible from the plowed area and planted 90% of the land with various green manure crops. Useful herbs will gradually replace weeds and make the soil more fertile, without the use of herbicides or other chemicals. It will take a few more years and hundreds of hours of work on the land before I can plant a full-fledged garden and cultivate a well-tended vegetable patch. But I'm in no hurry. I still don't have a fence, and without a fence, planting fruit trees is a waste of time, health, and money. During the cold season, various animals eat the leaves and branches of bushes and trees with great pleasure. So, I planted green manure on 90% of the plot land. I reserved the remaining 10% for a small home garden: garlic, strawberries, peppers, tomatoes. I planted garlic back in the fall, but strawberries were growing in another spot, and this spring I needed to transplant them. Last fall, I didn't have time to tend to the strawberries, so they became overgrown with weeds and spread uncontrollably, producing runners and new shoots. I carefully picked out all the plants, cleared away the weeds, and removed the old leaves. I prepared several rows for the strawberries in the new spot. Instead of the 20 plants I had last year, I ended up with 50, including the ones that grew over the course of the year. By June, I could see that not all the plants had survived, since many were weak and very small. The ants also took a real liking to the strawberries, so I've had to sprinkle special granules on them because the ants were eating the roots, leaves, and berries. Due to the transplanting and the ants, the berries are a bit small this year, but the harvest will be much better than last year's. I pay special attention to planting heat-loving vegetables, peppers, tomatoes, and eggplants. I get strong winds that break the plants, so I designed a collapsible greenhouse for them. I welded and painted 42 arches with ear-shaped holes and around 300 fasteners, 7 fasteners for every 2 arches. This allows the arches to be connected to each other and disassembled after the harvest, at the end of the season. The greenhouse is 190 centimeters high and 180 centimeters wide. The length of the greenhouse can be unlimited, since all the arches are identical and can be connected to each other with fasteners to any length. I built an 8-meter long greenhouse in 2 rows, expanding the greenhouse to 3 meters wide. This size is sufficient for growing vegetables for several people. As I mentioned earlier, I've plowed 70% of the newest plot. I've set aside the remaining 30% for other tasks. I set aside 10% for heavy equipment access for future construction work. Also, there are trees and shrubs that take up about 10% of the area, and I'll decide later what to do with them. There is a well on the property that needs to be cleaned and checked for water quality and quantity. And I reserved another 10% for building compost bins. For the various types of waste generated after working on the plot, I need 3 types of compost bins. One for hay and food scraps, one for roots, and one for bark. I started building the compost bin for hay and food scraps last year. In April and May, I finished the walls of the first compost bin, marked the spots for other 2, and dug in tree trunks to serve as posts. After each stage of working with the potent lumber, as well as while sorting and sawing the lumber, a lot of bark was left over. So I started collecting the bark in one place for storage and future use. Along the border of the leased plot, I planted 13 bare bushes that I bought at the market. They looked quite healthy, and I think they yield a small harvest as early as this year. I am planting some of the plants directly into the uncultivated soil, and later, if necessary, I'll determine their final location and transplant them. Two other tasks I spent time on and took care of were growing blueberries and growing mushrooms. Last year I planted 25 blueberry bushes. This spring it was time to check on the bushel growth and prune the unnecessary branches. But it turned out that the entire plantation was infected with a fungus that was eating away at the stems from the top all the way down to the roots. I had to prune about half of all the branches. I felt especially bad for the tall bushes. They were about 1.5 meters tall, and I thought they would yield a good harvest this year. But I had to cut them down to the root and treat all the plants for the fungus. Later, I'll post a separate video about planting blueberries and the results. Also last year, I inoculated wood with oyster mushroom mycelium, preparing about 4 cubic meters of wood for this. However, something went wrong. I tried to grow my own mycelium 3 times, and each time without success. This year, in early spring, oyster mushrooms appeared on only 3 trunks, so I decided to inoculate the wood with mycelium once again. Oyster mushrooms grow on trees, so to ensure proper inoculation, I drilled holes in each trunk with a drill and inserted the mycelium inside. I hope that this time my efforts will pay off, and I will be able to show you my harvest closer to the fall. There are still a huge number of trees on my property, and I'm gradually cutting down the most important areas. Clearing this section will allow me to remove bricks, metal, glass, and other human waste from the ground, as well as reduce the number of blood-sucking and disease-carrying insects around the house. Also, in April, I started mowing the land regularly. The grass grows very quickly, up to 25 centimeters a week, and it's home to mosquitoes, gnats, ticks, and other dangerous insects and animals, such as snakes. So, this was the part of the video dedicated to agriculture and land improvement. However, there is still work to be done related to construction of the plot for agricultural purposes. Dear friends, I don't have paid ads to promote my videos, nor do I make money from my YouTube channel. I am asking to support the development of my ranch in simple ways. Your subscription, comments, and likes are very important to me, as well as sharing my channel with your friends or on social media if you find my content interesting and useful. Also, if you are willing and you are able, you also can support me on Patreon, buy me a coffee, or sending USDT or USDC via crypto wallet. I will be very grateful to you for your help in the development of the off-road range and my content. Last year, I built a shed that I used to store my old Jeep and for various metalworking projects. As a temporary roof and walls, I used 2 tarps, which I spread across the entire length and width of the shed and secured with stakes, jute ropes, and construction tape. However, constant winds battered the tarps, pulling them to the sides and tearing them against the boards. Finally, one beautiful spring morning, a strong hurricane force wind snapped the ropes, broke the supports to which the ropes were attached, blew away the battens on the roof holding the tarps in place, and tore the tarps themselves. I realized 2 things. Instead of a tarp, I definitely needed to build a reliable roof, and second, supporting the canopy on the container is a better idea, since it places a heavy and uneven load on one side of the container. By the time I filmed the video, I had removed the rafters, installed posts and a wall plate along the container, and completely relieved the roof of the container of the load from the canopy. In June, I plan to cover the canopy with thin slabs. Another mini project I'm working on is a frame for self-draining automatic irrigation system for blueberries. This frame was supposed to be on top of the sea container, with 6 water-filled IBC totes placed on it. I welded all the pipes, sanded them, degreased them, painted them twice, and hoisted all the components onto the roof. I also hoisted 6 water tanks onto the roof using ropes. My friend helped me. However, just as I was ready to weld all the components together and fill the tanks with water, I realized I had miscalculated the load. When I first designed the frame, I assumed it would rest on the corner supports and the crossbeam, as these were the most reliable part of the container. However, when I positioned the components, I realized that the frame would rest on the container walls. 3 millimeters of steel will not withstand 6,000 kilograms of water plus another 1,000 kilograms or so from the cubes and the frame. I will have to redesign the entire project. I haven't started on it yet, but I will show you the whole process later. The final part of the work in this video is dismantling the pipe from the stove in the annex and cleaning the chimney of hardened tar. I explained in detail how I clean the chimney, how the annex is constructed, and what work I did there in the previous video, and I recommend you watch it. What tasks do I have to complete, and what are my plans for the near future? There is still a lot of garden work to be done. Also, I need to finish building the compost bins. I need to finish the roof on the shed. Also, I need to set up a self-draining automatic irrigation system and tidy up beds for the blueberries because the amount of weeds is a nightmare. In addition, I haven't devoted enough time to welding the post-wire fence, and that is also a priority. Also, ideally in June, I should start taking apart the old Jeep to map out the steps and create a list of restoration works. Also, I need to do a lot of mowing, cut down wild fruit trees, and tidy up the old garden. I also need to clean the storage container, because with such amount of work, various tools and purchases, a lot of items simply don't have a place. I have to admit that I've been irresponsibly dumping everything into one big pile. I need to put together a few cabinets using whatever I have on hand and organize the space. Earlier, people asked me in the comments if I would be keeping bees this year. Unfortunately, no. In addition to all the work on the plot, managing the hedge fund project takes up a lot of time. About 20 hours a day are spent on this, and there are huge costs involved, so I don't have the time or resources to add beekeeping to my schedule. First, the hives need to be restored. I got them from France, and they are already quite old. Second, I want to buy high-quality purebred bee colonies. Third, I need all the tools and equipment for caring for the bees, as well as for extracting and packaging honey, and so on. With all this cost for the bees and apiary supplies, I have to dedicate a lot of time to ensure I don't lose the colonies and to learn how to care for them. Last year, wild bees colonized one of the hives, but they didn't even collect enough money for themselves. And I realized that developing my own apiary will require a significant investment on my part. Dear friends, I hope my work at the off-road ranch inspires you, and you see the changes taking place on my land. Please write in the comments what projects you'd like to see covered in more details, and which areas you have experience in or you would like to gain some. I would appreciate your likes and follows as well as support in the comments. It was Valeria, the Offer Trench. I wish you all the best and see you soon.